Good morning.
Good morning.
Good to see you all here today.
You too. Good to see you. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing reasonably well. I may cut today's session a little bit shorter than I usually do because I'm quite tired. I've been having some breathing difficulties that have left me with a sleep deficit. So I'll just see what my stamina levels are for this morning. But well, we have a number of interesting questions here. And I assume that all of you have access to the questions and know how to see them on the Patreon page.
Yes, that's true.
Great. All right, I'm going to get them open here on my laptop so that, here we go. All right. Let's see. The first one is from Kim. Good morning, Kim. Well, might not be morning for you. It's morning for me. Good morning, Kim. Let's start with your question. You ask, how does one distinguish between pain and discomfort that should be dealt with versus the kind that comes from the mind's ability to blow up minor discomfort? You say, I can give an example. When doing walking meditation, like the 2-part or 3-part described in the appendix, I recently started noticing discomfort in my hip and groin. I'm not sure whether this is due to something physical that should be attended to, or if it's just something that is blown up by my mind because attention goes there and makes it stand out more in awareness. Well, first of all, there's not a clear distinction between pain and discomfort that is actually arising from the stimulation of pain nerve endings, and that which is purely mind generated in an attempt to basically an attempt to discourage you from continuing to meditate. And the reason for that is sometimes there can be an actual pain in the sense that there is something stimulating pain nerve endings, but as you've mentioned here, attention can go to it and then it can become subsequently exaggerated in your mind. So there's not a clear distinction, but one of the things that you mentioned is that, well, I might as well read the rest of your question. I've noticed how stories rooted in worry quickly arise and is very insightful, but also quite distracting. I can't help but worry if I'm actually walking in a harmful way, since walking this slow is not automatic at all. Perhaps I may be walking in a way that puts unhealthy pressure on some joints. I've tried rereading through both stage 3 and 4 on how to deal with pain. You mentioned that if it doesn't persist after meditation, it shouldn't be an issue, but it does persist sometimes. But here's the catch. I don't know if this is just because my attention has been drawn to it so much that it's standing out more than other things. Should I consider walking meditation that doesn't involve slow walking? Yeah. Okay. So you've done a pretty good job of considering the different possibilities of what's going on. Definitely your mind can grab hold of something like comparatively mild and meaningless pain, and worry about whether this is the sign of some terrible thing, and are you causing all kinds of physical damage that you'll have to deal with in the future by doing slow walking. Um, and yes, you read there. Pain that is purely mind. First of all, everything that I've said in 3 and 4 about dealing with pain has been in the context of sitting, not walking. That doesn't mean that it's not applicable, but it is a different situation. But the, the likelihood that this pain you're experiencing in walking, excuse me, the likelihood that this is due to some serious problem and that you're doing harm to yourself by doing a walking meditation is absolutely minuscule. Now, of course, if anyone is worried about a pain that they are experiencing and worrying that they may be harming themselves, it does make sense to see an appropriate physician and have it looked into. But I promise you, 99 times out of 100, when you've got a mild sort of pain that only shows up in certain circumstances, they'll run a few standard tests and they'll say there's nothing wrong. So that's not going to help you. Better that you should go ahead and explore it yourself. You say that sometimes it persists after the walking meditation and sometimes it doesn't. Well, that could tell you that there is something about walking more slowly that is creating discomfort, and that's not unlikely. It could be that just doing more slow walking meditation, it's eventually going to go away, or that by doing some stretching exercises or something like that, it will go away. But the thought that you had of maybe you should just try walking a little faster or walking, not walking so slow, absolutely do that. Turn this into an active investigation. It's a meditation in itself, right? And so walk and be aware of what qualitative differences there might be with the pain when you walk differently. But please set aside any worry that you're harming yourself. I spent enough years working in physical medicine that I can assure you that the possibility that you're harming yourself by walking slowly, even though it's at an unnatural pace, is actually going to do any physical harm. So you can drop that idea. But yeah, investigate it, play around with it. Discover the answer to your questions yourself. How much of this, see if you can, just through simple observation, since it's something that's there anyway, just by simply observing it, can you distinguish to what degree your mind is amplifying something into greater significance than it is? That would be kind of a rewarding aha moment in itself, right? So it's a good opportunity. The potential of dealing with pain in stages 3 and 4 is enormous. It can be a tremendous insight into what the Buddha was trying to convey with the first two noble truths. It's the vast majority of the suffering humans experience is purely mind generated. There is physical pain that the mind amplifies. And this is true of almost any physical pain that you have experienced in your life. Your mind resists it, and you experiencing it much more painfully with much more attendant suffering than is necessary or appropriate. This is what the Buddha described as the second arrow. I don't know, are you familiar with that? Yeah. So this is precisely that second arrow. But beyond the second arrow, when there's a physical injury or physical pain, if you think about it, the vast majority of your suffering has nothing to do with physical injury or physical pain. It's entirely mental, entirely generated by the mind. And this is human beings suffer um, several orders of magnitude more than any other species that I know of on this planet. And it's all that unnecessary mental pain, which is exactly what the Buddha is talking about as a result of resistance, craving, self-clinging. And that's all about what we're getting rid of. The gateway into that, and in one of the suttas where the Buddha is talking about noble truths, he says, if you can let go of your resistance to pain, even for a short time, you will discover that all there is a physical discomfort, and everything else is something that your mind has built on top of it. But the most important thing that you'll discover is that it doesn't have to be there at all. That most of the suffering that you experience as a result of a physical pain is mind generated, it's unnecessary, and of course, you might only be able to let go of it for a moment, but but when it's gone, it's gone. It's gone. Even in the middle of a severe migraine headache, you can just surrender to it and accept it. And for 10, 15 seconds, whatever period of time, it'll be all right. Uh, if you can tap into this, and one of the things that I talk about in working with pain is distinguishing between pain and the mind's reaction to it. If in the course of your meditation, the distinction between the two becomes really clear, enough so that you can step in there and turn it on and off at will, you will have had a deep insight into the nature of all human suffering, and also by extension, why it is that we humans, we not only suffer so much more than any other organism, but we cause so much more suffering for others than any other organism. So not nearly as many people as I had hoped have been able to use that practice at that stage to see into that and to have a lot of clarity around that insight. But I just want all of you that are here today to know that that's the potential that's there. And when I talk about you can emerge from that process free from the burden of this additional pain for the rest of your life, I seriously mean that. If you learn to turn off this resistance to physical pain, that doesn't mean that you're going to overcome all of the other sources of mental pain in your life. That's going to take a little extra work and a little more insight of different kinds. But if you can learn the trick of turning off that reaction to it, you can become one of these people that you've heard about. I'm sure you've all heard about the meditators who go to the dentist and say, yeah, I go ahead and do the root canal. I don't need any anesthetic. You heard of people like that? Well, I've heard a number of them, and that is possible. And that's the potential for what you can achieve at stage 4, is that you can progress the rest of your meditation career. Every time you start being bothered by a physical pain, you evaluate it as in terms of, is this something that I need to do something about? Then if you decide that it's not, you just disregard it from that point. You just let it be there, and you don't resist it and you don't react to it. So what you're dealing with, you're doing meditation, you're developing some pain in your hip and your groin. Take advantage of it. It will probably go away just as a result of continuing to walk. Your body will adapt. But that's not really the goal, is it? Learn as much from it as you can in the process. How do you like that as an answer?
Very good answer. I think I'll just try next session to just completely accept it and then see if it doesn't do.
Great.
I mean, it's not supposed to go away, but I'll just see if it actually makes a difference.
Yeah, see if you can learn about the nature of pain. Make that your goal. Not making it go away, but seeing what you can learn about the nature of pain. Seeing what insights, uh, small, lowercase insights or big, capital I insights into the nature of suffering. See what you can learn from it. Is there anything on this topic anyone else would like to comment on?
Can you apply, hi Culadasa, it's great to see you. Can you apply what you just said to mental suffering? This year has been a very challenging year, and for myself, I've really experienced some quite negativity, depressive thoughts and stuff like that, that I had thought that, you know, the Dharma and the teachings had helped me to resolve. And they've returned, and I wonder what advice you would give for not physical pain, but the pain that we generate in our minds.
Yeah. Yes, it absolutely does apply. As I say, dealing with these kinds of mental pain does require more insight and deeper insight, because all of this suffering, including the second arrow type suffering that we were just talking about, begins with the mind's resistance to what is. But it rapidly becomes much more than just the non-acceptance of what is, because that non-acceptance is really rooted in the sense of self and the desire to have that self not experience this suffering. So it's an aversion, it's craving in the form of aversion based in self-attachment that is the underlying dynamic. You can do a lot to work with different kinds of psychological and emotional pain by, instead of resisting them and trying to avoid them and being distracting yourself from them, by opening yourself up to and just engaging with them in the sense of not of embracing them, but of just allowing it to be there and letting go of any tendency to push it away. You will notice immediately that the less you push against it, the easier it is to tolerate. Now that's just the beginning. What will happen as a result of doing this is your mind will begin to put two and two together and see the degree to which resistance immediately amplifies the suffering that you're experiencing, whether you're going through grief or some other kind of loss or something like that. You'll be able to see that. And it doesn't mean that you're going to make it go away, but you'll be closer to being able to deal with it from a place of acceptance rather than one of the problems with resistance based in self-clinging is that it tends to be a snowballing, positively reinforcing cycle. It gets more and more intense and you also notice that this kind of pain is cyclic. It reaches a sort of peak of intensity, and then you'll have a period of respite, but then it'll start the same process again. You know what I'm saying? You recognize it? Yeah. And, you know, this will at least give you the ability to recognize when that's happening, observe the dynamics of what's happening in your mind, and and moderate that process somewhat. It's amazing how much just that experience of, I know, oh yes, here it is, this thing happened, I understand this thing that's happening. Just knowing that will mitigate that process. Ultimately, though, it's when we have these insights into the nature, not just the nature of pain, but the nature of the self that we think we are, that we're clinging to. We have the insights into the causal interconnectedness of everything that we are a part of. And we have an insight into the emptiness of all mental formations, including your experience of pain, but most especially in the case of mental pain, all of the ideas, you know what I mean? All of the ideas that this is based on, you know, that your grief or loss or whatever it is based on. It's a network of ideas that is self-supporting and maintaining itself. So those are all empty. So to the degree that you can see the emptiness, the interconnectedness, the lack of any true self at the root of this whole process, that everything is a process of change, and that you begin to observe pain and suffering itself as a changing process with a lot of different dynamics to it, you ultimately would come to a place where, and this is what the Buddha promised, you can be free of that kind of suffering completely. So
the thing that helped me the most was an insight regarding selflessness, is that I asked myself a question: if there is no self, who is there to suffer? I think I read that in one of Suzuki Roshi's books a few years ago, and it kind of just dissipated everything with a sudden return to understanding the self-referential nature of suffering, and that clinging to past conditioned patterns and stuff like that that were generating the thoughts that were generating the suffering.
that's really beautiful. I love that. That is really great.
Thank you.
Well, should we go on to the next question, or does someone else have something on the subject of the subject? All right. Well, next we have a question from the Explorer. 2 questions. By the way, I think this is Linus. I think this is the first time I've seen you here, or did I?
Happy to be here.
What? You're happy to be here. Okay. I'm happy to have you here. So great. You say, I see you own a TV. I feel like TV, and especially algorithmically supported unlimited entertainment like YouTube, Reddit, and Netflix, leads to a reduction of awareness and trains the mind to be distracted. Well, I totally agree with you. With my friends, they are often the focus of social gatherings, either by watching or talking about them, and they can be great sources of information. And here you have accurately identified some of the positive aspects of both TV and of other things like Reddit and YouTube and things like that. There are tremendous sources of information. How would you recommend one deals with these technologies as to not hinder meditation progress? Well, first of all, you know, there is a precept to avoid the use of substances that, or avoid activities that dull the mind, is the way that I usually phrase that precept. It was originally phrased in terms of using alcohol and substances that dull the mind. But nowadays, cell phones, computers, television, all these algorithmically driven things that try to present you with exactly what you want by learning about you. These are drugs as powerful and as addictive as alcohol or any other drug that a person can use. And the biggest problem with them is that they do dull the mind. Um, the best thing that you can do is to bring mindfulness to everything you do, because it's not just these things. It's not just drugs and alcohol and television that have this potential. It's many other things. If you bring mindfulness to your activities, the question of, well, why am I doing this right now? And is this what I most want to be doing? And why do I want to be doing it? Is this the best use of my time? If you can just bring those questions to it, you can come to recognize when you turn on the television, or for that matter, you check your phone for messages, whether you're doing this out of a sort of an addictive habituation to a kind of distraction that's going to make your life a little bit more pleasing in some way temporarily. Either reduce the boredom a little bit or add a little bit of excitement or something like that. When you can see what you're doing, then it just naturally changes your disposition towards doing that. I mean, you'll often have the thought, but why on earth do I need to watch the next episode in this series? I can think of half a dozen other things that would be better for me, would be more useful, and probably give me much greater satisfaction to do in this moment. But if you go ahead and watch that next episode, the fact that you observed it, the fact that you were aware of it, and if you maintain that mindfulness and you ask yourself partway through watching the episode, am I really getting the satisfaction out of this that I thought I would? Or am I just conditioned because a few times I did, now I'm just conditioned to keep going back to it and wasting some more of my time in the same process. Right? So that's the main thing, to bring as much mindfulness as you can into your activities, into every activity. You're going to find that there's a lot of things that are just like watching TV or checking your cell phone, that the reasons for doing them once they're exposed are not very satisfying ones, and your behavior will change as you come to understand that more clearly. Is that helpful with regard to that question?
Yes, thank you very much. I've noticed already that a few times in a day I will go and check my phone, and then I will just notice that well, I'm not really doing this because I want to know something. It's kind of an automated response to negative emotion.
Yes.
Which is like the worst kind of habit trigger.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just maybe something to share. I found some like browser extensions extremely helpful that block the algorithmic part of these platforms. So for example, when I visit YouTube, I only see my subscription box and I don't see all the videos that are recommended. So that's much easier to just stay on track.
Right. Yes. Great. All right. There was another part to your question. Let me look at that. After my morning sit, awareness slowly decreases throughout the day. Would it be beneficial to plan small 10-minute sits throughout the day to counteract that? Absolutely. And not just small 10-minute sits, but sometimes just sometimes if you're sitting at a stoplight waiting for the light to change, to just expand your awareness, focus your attention on something, like the light you're waiting to change. It doesn't matter, your breath, things like that. Just doing this periodically in order to maintain as much as possible a state of directed attention and expanded awareness throughout the day. Right? So take every opportunity that arises to do that. If you have a chance to do a 10-minute sit, by all means, do a 10-minute sit, but it don't need to be limited to that. You say, I fear this would train my mind to want to get up again after 10 minutes, even in my morning and evening sits, and therefore hinder progress. It's extremely unlikely that that will happen. It is more likely that the experience of bringing more awareness to your daily experience is going to make you want to experience this more all of the time. And it will naturally break down some of this compartmentalization that we have, that when I sit, I'm meditating, and the rest of the time I'm doing something else. Because, you know, it will break down. Even your 10-minute sits will, you know, your mind will learn that, yes, this doesn't need to be strictly compartmentalized, that I spend an hour in the morning doing this and I spend X amount of time in the evening doing the same thing, but everything else is different. Now it's not so different anymore. And that will be, that will produce its own satisfaction, its own rewards, and will build on itself. I mean, after all, I always like to say that's the reason they call it practice, because you're only practicing for when you can be in that state all the time.
Right. Thank you for clearing that up. I will try to incorporate that into my routine now.
Great, wonderful. Jared has the next question. Hello, Jared. You say your meditation sessions seem to be between stages 2 and 3. Which should take precedence, greater detail on the breath or maintaining present moment orientation? It feels easier to avoid wandering if I try to maintain awareness. For me at this point, it looks like trying to zoom out and look at all sensations at once. But based on what I'm reading in TMI, it sounds like progress will involve greater attention to more and more subtle details. Should I be seeking greater detail, even if it seems to result in risking losing the stability of my attention? No, let me just go over a little bit with you what you're actually, why you're doing the things you're doing, and what you're trying to accomplish. Because the reason for looking at more detail in the breath when you're following the breath is actually to help you stabilize your attention by giving attention more of a task to do. So if you find that it's having the opposite effect, then try another approach. Okay. But and the other thing that you're doing is you're beginning a long process of training your attention. Well, first of all, through stability, you're training your attention to respond to conscious intentions so that you can use attention intentionally. Okay. But one important aspect of using attention intentionally to investigate phenomena with the intention of having insight is to train attention to be clearer, to really see what is there more clearly than it usually does. The untrained mind, attention skims, looks for what it expects to see, when it finds what it expects to see, it doesn't look further. It doesn't really see beyond expectations. Of course, if it doesn't find what it expects to, then attention starts to become more active and clearer and more penetrating, at least until it's satisfied that, oh, yeah, I guess everything's the way it should be, or else there's something to do. But we want to train our attention so that it does what we want. We say, pay attention to this particular thing and don't just bounce all over the place. And then it does that. We're also training it so that whatever it is that we have asked attention to examine, it examines more deeply. So these are the long-term goals of attentional training. There is a short-term objective that is really important, the development of awareness and the increasingly stable and clearer attention develop in tandem with each other. In order to stabilize attention, you have to be able to recognize when attention is going elsewhere. You have to be able to recognize when you've forgotten the meditation object. You have to be able to recognize when the meditation object is alternating extensively with other things in the background, and so forth. The mental faculty that allows you to do that is introspective awareness that sees what's happening in your mind, that sees what attention is doing. This faculty can see that you've forgotten the meditation object and you become alert to it, and then you can refocus your attention. But you cannot develop that awareness if your attention is busy bouncing all around the way it usually is, always chasing after something interesting. So you have this thing where the more you manage to stabilize your attention, and if you can use looking for more detail in the process of following to help stabilize attention, the more powerful your awareness will become. And that means the more effective your awareness is going to be in alerting you to whether your attention is doing what you want or doing something different. So as attention becomes more stable, awareness becomes more powerful. As awareness becomes more powerful, it can help stabilize attention further, right? So this is really the dynamic we're looking for. Now, what you're experiencing, what I read into what you said, is very important. There is one of the most important things that you're going to do as a part of this mental training process is you're going to develop an enormous amount of conscious power, mental power, compared to what you have starting out. And both attention and awareness draw off that same source of mental power. So what you're seeing is that when you focus in more closely on the details, you lose awareness. But when you expand your awareness, then you don't have the same degree of detailed focus, because, the only way you got to build that up. First of all, just go ahead and explore that. Just familiarize yourself with, oh yeah, expand awareness, and attention starts to fade. Focus in closely on awareness or on attention, and awareness begins to contract, and so forth. And then recognize that where you want to go with this is to be able to focus in more closely on attention, but without losing the quality of awareness that you have. To be able to expand awareness a little bit more without losing that detailed perspective that attention has been giving you. So if you do that, knowing what you're doing, just playing with the balance, with the idea that, yeah, what I'm doing, I'm at this place now where more attention means less awareness. But if I can just keep raising the bar incrementally, I'll end up with very powerful consciousness, and I'll be able to sustain very powerful awareness of a very large scope, and be able to use attention like a laser to focus in and to penetrate whatever it is that I choose to investigate. That's where you're going. Does this help to put these things in context?
It does. Thank you. To make sure I got what you said, I think you helped clarify that the awareness piece and the attention piece, they feed upon one another. You did say earlier on that the that the attention does fit into the longer term goal, because that's what we're using to investigate phenomenon. So then I think what I will take back to my practice is continuing to push for greater detail in my attention, and maybe and not be so concerned if it causes me to destabilize. I'll just continue to practice, and over time raise that bar.
Yes, that's good. That's good. And I just want to add something you said absolutely correctly, that you want to be able to use attention to investigate phenomena. But the thing is that attention by itself is just going to observe and deconstruct things and label them. That powerful awareness is absolutely essential for that information to become insight. It is within the unconscious processing that underlies awareness that all those pieces are put together and patterns emerge. The patterns that add up to, aha, there's nothing but change. Aha, this self is just an illusion. Aha, everything is causally interconnected. Aha, everything that arises from my mind is empty in the sense that it's all due to causes and conditions. Insight, that you have to have both. No one can ever achieve insight through attention. What they'll end up is a mass of analyzed data with no way to put it together. Okay. And when this is the mind that is fully ripe for insight and for awakening, is one that awareness, as it's building patterns, directs attention to investigate certain kinds of phenomena in certain ways, which provides more information so that awareness is able to see more and deeper patterns to things, and further direct the activities of attention. And so you have the clear seeing aspect of attention, which is what's happening when you're looking for more detail. As a matter of fact, that's happening when you're looking at the sensations of the breath instead of the breath, because after all, the sensations of the breath are really the only thing that's there. Breath and nose and everything else is just a story you've made up, right? So you're already practicing this vipassana, with clear seeing. And as your ability to use attention becomes more and more refined, that will become a kind of penetrating seeing, where now, instead of staying on an object for a long time, your attention can hit on anything, penetrate deeply into it, and then it's ready to move on to the next thing. So.
Thank you.
I think it helps to have a bigger picture, and I wish when I had written TMI, I'd spent more time on bigger picture, but then again, it needed all that instruction detail too. Anyway.
Thank you, Culadasa.
Thank you for your question, Jared.
Culadasa?
Yes.
Can I ask one question? When you say expand awareness, is that something that is possible without the use of attention?
Well, yes, you can expand awareness, but the thing is, in the early stages of meditative training, expansion of awareness is going to lead to a dimming of attention, and even to a tendency of attention to no longer be directed, but begin to drift lightly over all kinds of things. So, but yes, the most of our awareness is extrospective awareness. Most of us haven't spent a lot of time developing introspective awareness, observing the processes that are actually going on in our minds. But as we develop more introspective awareness, now that may seem like it's going the opposite direction to an expansion, but it's not. Because as it turns out, everything that we would call extrospective awareness is actually happening in the mind, right? You agree? Yeah, that's all happened. So all of a sudden, instead of having two different places you can look, that inner place becomes, it expands, and now it's including all of the sensory data that's entering your mind as well. And the next step in the expansion of awareness beyond that is that it becomes metacognitive. You're no longer on the ground level of experiencing awareness, but you're now from this higher perspective, this metacognitive perspective. And you're starting to see the big picture in a way that you've never seen before. And there is no better way to describe that than as an expansion, right? So this is the expansion of awareness that you're after. This is what the Buddha referred to as samasati, right sati. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sorry, I didn't mean to start asking questions, but it was just, I noticed when subtle dullness is present, it will often be hard to not expand. My awareness, it helps to come out of the dullness when I get aware of more stuff, but it often involves directing attention different places to make sure they're still there.
Sure, that's a natural mechanism. When dullness causes your awareness to collapse, and so to overcome dullness, you need to expand your awareness. Before you've developed a lot of direct control over things like the behavior of awareness and the behavior of attention, your mind is going to resort to the ways that it knows best. So it will expand attention by probing with, or expand awareness by probing with attention, right? So you start paying attention to a wider variety of things on purpose with the objective of increasing your awareness, and presto, you've overcome a lot of dullness. Your previously collapsed awareness is now expanded again and open. Okay, let's see. Gunnar has the next question. All right, let's see that. What is boredom and how does it relate to suffering and desire and aversion? Sometimes I catch myself doing meditation just because there's nothing better to do, like when walking or going to sleep. I'm wondering if this is just me avoiding the pain of boredom, which would create suffering instead of alleviating it. And then you have another question about suffering. Let's go ahead and deal with this first. Now, boredom, yeah, if you look at boredom, what is it? It's a discomfort, a dissatisfaction. You want some more stimulation. You want something like that. So, yeah, it's a dissatisfaction. It's a kind of suffering. And I think it's wonderful that you have the experience of thinking that, well, there's nothing better to do than meditation. Now, hopefully, as time goes by, you feel that same way about many more things, like watching TV or something like that. But I don't think you need to worry about that particular response to the suffering that is boredom causing more suffering. But it's just it's a healthy response to a dissatisfaction rather than a less healthy one. The trouble is that your mind is going to be it's going to soon be looking for more exciting and more interesting ways to eliminate the boredom than meditation. So you want to make use of that feeling like, yeah, I think I'll meditate, to get to the place where meditation is so rewarding that you really can't think of anything better to do. Yeah.
I think I was prompted to ask this question in relation to the doing part, as applying effort,
Mhm.
and about how hard it is for us not to apply effort, and that at some point you have to let go of
Yeah.
effort for meditation, right? And I feel like I'm still struggling with that, which can create some discomfort.
Yes. Yes, that is one of the biggest obstacles that we have to overcome. It is something inherent in being human. Our sense of self has these two parts to it: the doer, the agent, and the other part is the observer, the experiencer. We have a much more strongly developed sense of being the agent in charge, to being the doer, identifying everything as I did this, I thought that, I felt that, and I need to do this, and I need to do that, and I need to make that happen. When I say it's due to being human, it's due to standing upright, freeing our hands to do things, and also developing tools and things like that, of developing these very large brains with the capacity. Most any animal that you can think of in a new situation is going to have a very limited variety of things that it can do. It can evaluate the situation and say, well, I'd better run, or I'd better fight and defend my territory, or whatever it is. But there's not, beyond that, there's not a whole lot of options, right? Humans, it's different. Every new situation we find ourselves in, it's what can I do about it? Or how can I make use of this situation to achieve something that I want? So we're just predisposed to confront absolutely every situation. I'm saying new situations, but that really every situation. You walk into a different room in your house and your mind's going to respond to, well, what can I do about this, or how can I use this in some way to my advantage? That's pretty deep-seated. That is so fundamental that, just as you find in meditation, it's hard to get over feeling like there's an I in here that is the doer, that is the agent in charge, that has to make something happen. Oh, attention is supposed to be stable. I have to make attention stable. One of the wonderful things about meditation is it just shows you over and again, you can't do it. There is no self that can make that happen. So by the time you get to the point where you're ready to have insight into what it means not to have a self, or not to be the self that you think you are, you've already gotten used to that fact to a great degree. So yeah, keep dealing with the tendency to strive, and know that it's built into you and it's served you and your ancestors well for a long time. But it's time to learn to set it aside when appropriate.
So when we say we want to try and be mindful throughout the day,
Well,
it's an interesting concept, right? Because there's no doing in that doing, right?
That's right.
So it's just a matter of keeping the intention, I guess.
Yeah, you be mindful. You don't do mindful. There's absolutely no doing involved with being mindful. As a matter of fact, the less you try to do, the more mindful you can be.
Yeah, I realize that.
Let's see. And you have another question here, Gunnar, that about suffering. You know how sometimes you're doing something painful, like doing stretches, and suddenly the mind realizes there's no need to suffer. That you can accept the pain, and it's easier that way. Well, I've now more than once caught myself scanning for suffering. My mind scans consciousness to find suffering and to extinguish with its light. This seems fine, but is tiring. Can you comment? Well, yeah. this is what we were talking about earlier. I'm sure you recognize that. And it's wonderful that you've developed this skill and this facility. And it absolutely makes sense that once you've learned that you can do this, that you go looking for discomfort just so that you can do it. But once you've done that enough, you don't need to. Life is going to provide more than enough discomfort without you having to go look for it. Those things that your mind's not already grabbing onto and making into a big deal, you don't need to go and grab onto them on purpose just so that you can let go of it again, right? Yeah, you've done what you need to in that regard. So just continue to use this skill. But yeah, of course it's tiring. It's tiring and it's unnecessary. You're taking sources of discomfort that are already irrelevant. So what's the point, right?
What's the point? So it's yeah, it's I guess it's a little bit of fear that I'm just not aware of any kind of suffering, that it's, ignorance that's hiding some other suffering. I'm always, anyway, I get what you're saying.
Great. Wonderful.
Thanks.
Okay. Question from you, Ahmet. I've listened to one of your talks in which you mention a faculty of the mind that breaks down information into pieces and labels the parts and imputes particular nature to those parts. But what exactly is this information? Is it the total sensory input we take in a given moment of consciousness? And does this information also include our interpretation of these raw inputs? What is the whole and what is the part that is obtained by this process of breaking down? It'd be great if you can provide an example of these terms. Finally, why does the insight into emptiness change drastically the way we see the world? Or maybe we can use the term cognitive processes, the way we see the world and act. Okay. It sounds like you actually got two questions here. We'll deal with this first one. I don't know which talk you're referring to, but it sounds like I'm talking about what the conscious faculty of attention and the unconscious mental processing that drives attention and that processes the information that's obtained by attention. As for what the input is, as for what the information is that's being acted upon, it's only a tiny, tiny part of the information that has become conscious, and that in turn is only a minuscule part of the sensory information that is arriving from your sense organs to your brain. The processing power of conscious processes of attention is minute compared to the amount of data that comes in. The amount of data that enters your mind via the sense organs every second is in the millions of bits, maybe even hundreds of millions of bits of information. The amount of information that gets, that's per second. The amount of information that gets processed in consciousness is definitely less than 100 bits per second. So there's already a lot of filtering of data before it even gets to consciousness. Then what arrives in consciousness occupies the field of conscious awareness. Attention operates within the field of conscious awareness, and it isolates some part of the field of conscious awareness. So it's not acting on the totality of it. It can't. What it is, it's like the microscope that zooms in on a small part of what arrives in consciousness. We won't worry about how much information other than that has already been filtered out. But attention moves around in the field of conscious awareness to select its objects. But when it selects its object, what it does is, yeah, it takes apart and labels, it dismantles the object. And it does this in ways that it has learned, that are context dependent, so on and so forth. There's no absolute way that it does it. Doesn't necessarily always break down the same object in the same way, which is good because that allows us to learn more. Two people don't necessarily analyze the same object in the same way, all of which is just the way it is. What happens with this information is this information, this is all data of a particular kind. It's analytical data, okay? It's the result of deconstruction and, you know, trying to figure out which gears in the watch do serve what purpose, right? And putting labels on them. Now, the thing about attention and the unconscious processing of information that's related to attention is that it tends to be satisfied whenever it can distinguish A from B and give a label to A and another label to B. It's the real understanding happens over on the other side of the brain, where this information is formed into patterns, where patterns are discerned. And that's how you figure out, oh, this is how the watch works. Yeah, this gear turns that gear and that turns the hands, and as the spring unwinds, it does this, and so on and so forth. And then all these pieces get put together and there's a pattern, and all of a sudden, oh, all watches work like the, well, all mechanical watches, we should say, not digital ones. All mechanical watches must work in a similar way. And now you know something not just about a watch that you took apart, but you know something about watches and mechanical watches and clocks in general. See, so that's the way these parts of your mind work. So I must have been talking about the way that attention works and the way that attention deconstructs and labels things. And it's an extremely valuable function. And if you look at the way laboratory science works, it's the same thing. Of course, science has two components to it. It deconstructs, yes, but then the next and actually more important focus of what science does is the synthesis. After it's deconstructed, it puts everything back together again. And that's what I was talking about, which is what the other part of your mind does. The unconscious processing that gives rise to the experience of awareness is it puts it all together in a bigger picture. So this thing that our mind does, actually, you can look at the way science is carried out and you can recognize, oh yeah, what this is just, this is a focused development of the way our minds process information anyway. In that sense, we're all scientists. It's just a lot of us haven't been formally trained at it, right? But anybody that's ever watched something and figured out how it worked, or taken something apart, tried to put it back together again, has been basically doing science. And the wonderful thing about this is it illustrates very clearly the functions of attention and awareness in processing information. I don't know whether I've gotten away from your original question or not. As far as does it include raw inputs? It does to a limited degree. The thing about attention is that, as I mentioned to you earlier, attention tends, without training, to see what it expects to see on the basis of past experience. It's only when it's surprised, it's only when what it sees is different than what it expected that it ever looks more deeply. Of course, this is a tremendously efficient way for attention to function in our daily lives. We don't waste time analyzing something that is, oh yeah, that's the way it's always been, that's the way it's supposed to be. But then when something doesn't fit, then we analyze it more closely. But this tendency, unfortunately, after a while, and this happens to people as they get older, and maybe you'll be able to know what I'm referring to there when I describe this. We become more and more habituated, not just to seeing what we expect to see, but also only looking where we expect to see what we expect to see. You'll notice that people's lives become more and more routinized. They're less and less inclined to seek out novel experience, and this is a natural tendency. It's part of the built-in efficiency of the mind. The mind exists to help us survive, and one aspect as we learn about the world that helps us survive. But the other thing is, if we can create a niche for ourselves in the world that we really understand well, then we don't have to keep up this energetically expensive process of constantly trying to figure things out. This tendency is always there. So what we have to do if we're in pursuit of insight and awakening is we have to train attention not to keep doing that, not to do this as so extensively, so that you look at the breath and suddenly you have the experience of realizing it really is nothing but a series of sensation, and everything else is a story I made up. When you look more closely, what you'll even find out is, well, first of all, in terms of raw data, that is closer to raw data when there's just a feeling of a sensation of movement, sensation of warmth, sensation of coolness, things like that. That is much closer to raw data than what you experienced a few moments before. It's like, oh, there's warm air moving into my nostrils. Oh, there's cool air moving into my nostrils. There's warm air flowing out of my nostrils, things like that. You dispense with the nostrils and the air, and there is nothing but a sensation of coolness, a sensation of movement, a sensation of warmth, so on and so forth. You train the mind to see beyond what it's used to seeing and what it expects to see. This is what allows it to see that this is not a world of things the way we always thought it was. This is a world of processes, of interconnected processes, of process. Everything is constantly changing, and everything is constantly changing in dependence on absolutely everything else. So that's a good example of using attention to see beyond the expected and see what's really there. There are no things. There are only processes. There's only change, right? That's insight. So the mind tends more and more just to see what it's always seen and just to see what's always expected. So we've got to push against that. We've got to train the mind, and we've got to train attention to look a little more deeply, look beyond. That's actually what vipassana means. Vipassana means to see, and there's several meanings for V, which like to see in, but the one that I like the best is to see beyond. And the example that's given in the Polytext dictionary is as it's like seeing through reeds to what's on the other side. Seeing beyond what is most obvious to what is there past that. So back to what I think you were asking about, Amit. To see the raw inputs is something that tends to happen as a result of training, and it's a very desirable part of it. But without training, the mind tends to go in the other way, in the other direction, and see the more composite, the whole, it sees the stories it's created in the past instead of what it's actually looking at. You had, part of your question here was about emptiness. Why does insight into emptiness change drastically the way we see the world? Or maybe we can use the term cognitive processes. Well, yes, that that's a very appropriate thing to ask as a part of that same question. Insight into emptiness is the realization that everything that appears in our mind, no exceptions, is just a construct of our mind, a fabrication of our mind, right? That's to have insight into emptiness is to realize this is absolutely true of every experience I've ever had or ever will have. Now, one of the things this points to, of course, is what we were just talking about. Yes, we have these elaborate fabrications, you know, like for example, the breath. This fabrication involves a body and a nose and directions in and out and a substance called air and all this sort of stuff. God, that's this huge fabrication. But when you really look, there's nothing there but a series of sensations, right? So this whole what emptiness, the full realization of emptiness is my entire body is a mental fabrication. My body is a story my mind's made up. Whatever is really there certainly isn't going to be the same as this fabrication that I'm holding in my mind. It may have some resemblances of it, but probably only the resemblances are the ones that are most directly relevant and useful to me. That table that I see over there, you know, that exists only in my mind. It doesn't mean that there's not something over there, but whatever it is that's over there and what it is that I'm seeing in my mind, what I see in my mind is empty of being that. Instead, it's a mental fabrication that I've created, probably mostly because of all of the uses I've discovered for tables in my life and all of the different kind of tables that I've encountered. So I just see this mental fabrication. When you realize emptiness, it opens up this whole world. Most especially all of the views and theories and ideas that you might have held most dearly and wanted to argue most strongly for or against, or things like that. Those are all empty too. There's no need to be attached to any of them. You can hold everything lightly. It becomes much easier to see things in different ways than you used to before. And after all, awakening is seeing things in a different way than you used to. Because the different way, the way that you always are seeing things is producing an enormous suffering for you, causing you to cause suffering for other people. And it's just not that effective. You're constantly being surprised because your view of the world doesn't adequately predict what's going to happen. Think about how often your view of the world fails to predict what the consequences are going to be of what you say and do. When you realize emptiness, all of a sudden it makes sense. Oh, well, yeah, of course. And it allows you to work with that in a very productive way. It's very liberating. Was that too much?
I think you have answered it perfectly, right? And the watch example was very good. Like, I think I've observed this in studying. Like, usually we try to, like, the things are teach us like parts in different parts. We are acquiring each concept, but usually the bigger picture is not given. Like, it should be. Like, as you said, it should be the faculty of awareness that does that, which is more closer to truth. Yeah.
I just looked and realized that that was only a short paragraph, and you had another one. How many questions we got? Oh, there's just one left from Jared here. Okay. Your second part of yours is also, I'm a bit confused about the differences in experiences of moments of awareness, rapidly alternating attention and awareness that takes place simultaneously with attention. I have 3 different types of experience. I'm not sure about which one needs to be labeled as awareness. First one is the experience of a sense of expandedness in meditation, like feeling less limited in terms of perceptual field, which seems to fit the description of awareness that takes place simultaneously with attention in the first interlude. Yes, absolutely. That is awareness. And as I mentioned earlier, but I think I should really reinforce and make clear, and I didn't do adequately in the book. I did it, but I didn't do it as clearly and forcefully as I could. Attention operates within the field of awareness. It's only it has no other source of something to focus on except what's already in the field of awareness. That's one of the problems with my attempt to take the Abhidhamma model of moments of consciousness, which is really moments of attention, and trying to adapt it to awareness by creating moments of awareness. I'm going to redo that if I ever get a second edition. But awareness, all awareness is simultaneous with attention. You cannot have attention. You can have awareness enormously collapsed, so you're hardly aware of much more than what you're paying attention to. But you cannot have attention without there being simultaneous awareness. And what you're talking about, this expandedness, is most definitely the direct experience of awareness in its own right. The second experience you mentioned, the other one is the experience of knowing something such as a thought, or am I getting ahead here? Yeah, such as a thought is there in a given moment of consciousness, but not knowing much about its content. This example usually happens in daily life. For example, while studying, I'm aware of the presence of some background thinking activity, but don't see its content very clearly. But still, this is experienced as a single moment of consciousness, not something that takes place simultaneously while I'm paying attention to something else, as described in the first interlude. So is this a moment of awareness or a moment of attention in which the attention alternates so rapidly that the thing it goes to is not perceived very clearly? It could be both. It's probably partly both, to the degree that you can correctly, accurately discern it as being its own moment of consciousness. It's going to be a moment of attention where attention briefly alternated with something that was in the field of awareness and made it stand out. And the fact that you don't know much about, you just know there was a thought, but you don't know much about it, is because your attention didn't rest there or didn't return there often enough to gather that much information. But the experience of objects in awareness without not involving attention landing on them momentarily fits that description as well. There is one difference. Okay, you know that there's a thought taking place, but you don't know exactly what it's about. When it's just awareness and not attention, it has this quality of, you're really seeing more this thought process arising in this context of this bigger picture. And you may, if you're going to be conscious of anything about it, more so than its content, is going to be maybe what triggered it arising, what it's related to, how it fits in with the other things that are present in the field of your conscious awareness. As awareness becomes more powerful, this becomes clearer. Now, what both brief moments of attention have in common and awareness has in common is that you don't get that same detail, because attention wasn't on it long enough to provide the detail, and awareness just doesn't. Awareness is more about how it fits into a bigger picture. So they're both going to be the same, and that you're not going to know much about what the actual content is of the thought. But where they're going to be different is that awareness is going to kind of place this thought that has arisen in a bigger picture. And if it's just alternating attention, you're not going to be conscious of that aspect. You're just going to be conscious of, oh yeah, there's this thought over there that keeps coming back, keeps wanting to trying to grab some attention. Okay, so
Culadasa, could I ask a question? Joe
sure,
here.
please.
First of all, thank you so much for your teaching, and just so grateful for it. Not to belabor this point, but the way I understand the technique is that I have no problem understanding or perceiving or maintaining my introspective awareness, and also too, the way I understand the technique is that I don't focus the attention so much that it's to the exclusion of my introspective awareness, and then that the objective is for both of them to grow in balance.
Right.
And that what happens is that there's, and this is my question, is there three ways that I'm maintaining that balance? One is that I check in.
Mm-hmm.
The other is the aha experience. And the third is that I believe I maintain a level of metacognitive
Right.
awareness.
Right.
And so where my question came up is that the checking in process, I can get into a situation where I'm constantly checking in, and which seems to be that the attention is then using the metacognitive awareness as the meditation object, in effect.
Right.
And then I started to be concerned, am I checking in too often? Or when you describe balance, what you're describing is just the normal backdrop of metacognitive awareness, that I don't favor the attention so much that I lose that. I hope that's a clear question.
Yes, what you're after is enough conscious power that you can maximize both without losing either. But yes, the checking in that you're doing, don't worry about it being too much, because the effect that it's going to have, and the reason as a technique that I recommend it where I do, is it's using attention to really push awareness, to push the limits of awareness, to expand awareness. And it's very effective in doing that. I suppose it is possible to do that beyond the point of diminishing returns, where it's just constantly interjecting attention unnecessarily is going to actually now detract from the quality of your awareness. So my experience is that more often what's going to happen is just that the mind realizes it just doesn't need this much checking in. Like, you are already, whatever attention finds when you check in, you already knew that anyway. It was sort of like that. It's redundant, it's like, don't bother telling me that. I already knew about it, so it should take care of it itself. And what you're moving towards is that place where you have this very powerful metacognitive awareness that is just, it's continually aware of the whole picture as it's unfolding in your mind. And at this point, it begins to be the primary director of attention. It's like, whoa, go over there, because we've got something worthwhile. Give us some more data about what that's about. Focus in on that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. And so the primary in this balance, the focus is on the attention, as long as it's not to the point that it diminishes my metacognitive awareness. So I can maintain that balance of the two, but the
That's
primary focus is on the attention,
Well, as
or the
you
primary.
reach a point where the primary focus is on metacognitive awareness optimally interacting and making the best possible use of attention.
Right. And so that balance grows. So don't worry about the.
That's right. And also that balance, what the optimal form of that balance is going to be constantly changing. Sometimes more attention, sometimes less. It's going to be depending on what your mind is doing in the moment, what you're exploring and how. So it's not like there is a perfect balance, you know, that you can say it's this mathematical point on a line, because it shifts. It's the optimal for what the mind is doing in the moment. That the perfect balance for the job, that's for the task at hand.
And as the balance grows, the effortlessness grows.
Balance what?
As the balance of the two grow, it becomes more effortless.
That's right. It becomes much more effortless, it becomes much more natural.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. And welcome, Joe. I'm glad to have you here, and I'm glad you contributed here. I don't know. I think there was a third thing that that Amit was asking about.
I think we can skip that one. I actually removed it, but okay. Yeah.
All right. If you're happy, that's fine. We'll just check, see if anybody else has something else that they want to say about that. If not, I think we have time for your last question, Jared. So
Thank you. It actually kind of built on the last one, but
yeah, actually, what?
On your last response, the response to my last question, that I think it kind of will tag on to that about getting that more deep. It's about, basically the question is how to cultivate that interest, that curiosity in the breast, that basically that intention just gets stronger and stronger to want to see these little details.
That's right. As your mind discovers how much else is available to attention, then it naturally becomes more interested. Curiosity naturally arises. Yeah. So, yeah,
It feels like I'm forcing this interest, like, okay, I have to be interested. And that's why I was writing, it's like you know, at some point in my life, I didn't really like vegetables, but I'm like, they're healthy, I have to eat them. But at some point now where I'm at, I realize they're so healthy for me, but I also just love them. It just goes hand in hand. And you know, like I remember somebody told me about like trying to sense the temperature of the air, and some of these things, I kind of get, when I don't sense it, and okay, what's the temperature? What's the temperature? And I don't sense it. It actually, I notice it's very discouraging. Mm-hmm. But I'm still struggling to like get a true appetite for this breath.
And use you know, the techniques of following and connecting are both just intended to help you develop that curiosity, that appetite, by noticing that there's more to the breath than you thought there was before, you know. And so great. Well, if you're satisfied with that, well, that's great. That's I managed to make it through all the questions without getting so tired that I had to call into this. So thank you very much, everyone. It's been very good. Enjoy the rest of your day and hope to see you again in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Culadasa.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Culadasa.
See you.
Thank you.
Bye now.